Dear boys, here I am on board the Libert en route to Geneva, Switzerland, to a meeting for the ILO, International Labor Organization. It is the month of May 1951. My first class cabin is very comfortable and pleasant. I could not wish for better accommodations. The food is excellent, the service is adequate. The flowers friends and associates sent are delightful and much appreciated. The weather, too, is all one could desire. I have settled down in my deck chair, relaxed and content. The daily chores, the unavoidable irritations, the worry over big and little things I left behind for the time being, at least. Just to sit and watch the changing colors of the sea, now green, then blue, and finally merge with the white of the waves, is like a tonic to a tired body. The sky is a heavenly blue with just a few cumulus clouds. How lovely and how restful! For the moment of peace and contentment replaced somber thoughts and a restless spirit. It is, I think, quite natural that I should, under the circumstance, think of you all and wish for your presence. Thinking of you two brought to mind the many times you asked me to tell you a story when I was with you, and how I would always tell you that I am not very good at storytelling, and offered to read to you instead. Now, however, I am beginning to realize that time is passing swiftly, and that in the nature of things I shall not be with you much longer. One must resign to the inevitable. I am, therefore, going to try and tell you a story. After all, my own story. A story which I hope you will, when you grow up, find interesting and informative. There is quite a gap between your life and mine. I would like to, if at all possible, that is, if I can, fill that gap. One day, a relative of mine who was employed by the now infamous Triangle Shirtwaist Company, the largest manufacturers of shirtwaists in New York City, got me a job with that firm. The day I left the Jackson Street shop, the foreman told me that I was very lucky to have gotten a job that concern because there is work all year round, and that I will no longer have to look for another job. I found later that the workers were actually eager to work for this company because there was steady employment. For me, this job differed in many respects from the previous ones. The Triangle Waste Company was located at Green Street and Washington Place. This was quite a distance from my home. Since the day's work began at 7:30, it meant that I had to leave the home at 6:40, catch the horse car. Yes, boys, there were horse cars in those days. Then change for the electric trolley at Duane and Broadway and get off at Washington Place. You will be interested to know that both rides cost only a nickel, and if I remember right, the service was much better than it is today, when we pay 15 cents for a single ride. The day's work was supposed to end at 6 in the afternoon, but during most of the year, we youngsters worked overtime until 9 p.m., every night except for Fridays and Saturdays. No, we did not get additional pay for overtime. At this point, it is worth recording the generosity of the Triangle Waste Company by giving us a piece of apple pie for supper instead of additional pay. Working men and women today who receive time and one half and at times double time for their overtime will find it difficult to understand and to believe that the workers of those days were evidently willing to accept such conditions of labor without protest. However, the answer is quite simple. We were not organized, and we knew that individual protest amounted to the loss of one's job. No one in those days could afford the luxury of changing jobs. There was no employment insurance. There was nothing better than to look for another job, which will not be better than the one we had. Therefore, we were, due to our ignorance and poverty, helpless against the power of our exploiters. As you will note, the days were long and the wages low. My starting wage was just $1.50 a week, a long week, consisting more often than not of 7 days. Especially was this true during the season, which in those days were longer than they are now. I will never forget the sign which on Saturday afternoons was posted on the wall near the elevator, stating, "If you don't come in Sunday, you need not come in on Monday." What choice did we have except to look for another job on Monday morning? We did not relish the thought of walking the factory district in search of another job. And would we find a better one? We did not like it. As a matter of fact, we looked forward to the one day on which we could sleep in a little longer, go to the park, and get to see one's friends and relatives. It was a bitter disappointment. My job, like that of the other kids, was not strenuous. It consisted of trimming off the threads left on the shirtwaists by the operators. We were called cleaners. Hundreds of dozens of shirtwaists were carried from the machines to the children's corner and put into huge cases. When these were trimmed, they were put into similar empty cases, ready for the examiners to finish the job. By the way, these cases were used for another purpose, which served the employers very well indeed. You see, boys, these cases were high enough and deep enough for us kids to hide in, so that when a factory inspector came to inspect the factory, he found no violation of the child labor law, because he did not see any children at work. We were all hidden in the cases and covered with shirtwaists. Clever of them, was it not? Somehow the employer seemed to have known when the inspector would come and had enough time to arrange for our hiding place. As I said before, the job was not strenuous. It was tedious. Since our days began early, we were often hungry for sleep. I remember a song we used to sing which began with, "I would rather sleep than eat." This song was very popular at the time, but there were conditions of work which in our ignorance we so patiently tolerated, such as deductions from your meager wages, if and when you were 5 minutes late, so often due to transportation delays. There was the constant watching you, lest you pause for a moment from your work. Rubber heels had just come into use, and you rarely heard the foreman or the employer sneak up behind you, watching. You were watched when you went to the lavatory, and if in the opinion of the forelady you stayed a minute or two longer than she thought you should have, you were threatened with being fired. There was the searching of your purse or any package you happened to have, lest you might have taken a bit of lace or thread. The deductions for being late was strictly enforced, because deductions, even for a few minutes from several hundred people, must have been quite a sum of money. And since it was money the Triangle Waste employers were after, this was an easy way to get it. That these deductions meant less food for the workers' children bothered the employers not at all. If they had a conscience, it apparently did not function in that direction. As I look back to those years of actual slavery, I am quite certain that the conditions under which we worked and which existed in the factory at the Triangle Waste Company were the acme of exploitation perpetrated by humans upon defenseless men, women, and children, a sort of punishment for being poor and docile. Despite these inhuman working conditions, the workers, including myself, continued to work for this firm. What good would it do to change jobs since similar conditions existed in all garment factories in that era? There were other reasons why we did not change jobs. Call them psychological, if you will. One gets used to a place even if it is only a workshop. One gets to know the people you work with. You are no longer a stranger and alone. You have a feeling of belonging which helps make life in a factory a bit easier to endure. Very often friendships are formed and a common understanding established. These, among other factors, made us stay put, as it were. One evening I was walking home from a long day's work. It was summer, but by evening the air was a bit cool and I rather liked the walk home. The sights were similar, the usual signs of poverty and all the resulting misery therefrom. As I saw the little children playing in the gutter, the men and women looking tired and drab, the dark and filthy tenements, I thought, "Dear God, will this ever be different?" When I got home, I sat down and wrote. While at work, I am thinking only of my own drab existence. I get discouraged and a bit low in my mind. Every day, the same foreman, the same forelady, the same shirtwaists and more shirtwaists. The same machines, the same surroundings, the same day is long, the task tiresome. In despair, I ask, "Dear God, will it ever be different?" And on my way home from work, I see again those lonely men and women with hopeless faces, tired eyes, harassed by want and worry. I again ask, will it ever be different? I wrote more of the same, and when it was done, I decided to send it to the forward. Of course, I did not expect it to be accepted or published. I did not think it was good enough for publication. I was not a writer, and I knew it, but I did want to express my feelings and get them down on paper. There was satisfaction in doing just that. I posted the article and did not give it another thought. A few days later, it was a Saturday, as I was approaching the Triangle Factory, I noticed a number of my fellow workers holding the forward and pointing to something. And when they saw me, they all shouted congratulations and hailed me as a conquering hero. For my piece was published. I could hardly believe it, but there it was, my name and all. This, I believe, was one of the highlights of my life. Perhaps a minor one compared with what was to follow in the years ahead. However, at the time it was the achievement I did not anticipate. Encouraged by the success of my first attempt to give expression to my thoughts and feelings, I tried it again and again, and each time my articles and stories were accepted and published. I became famous almost overnight. In a small way, I became the voice of the less articulate young men and women with whom I worked and with whom later I was to join in the fight for improved working conditions and a better life for all.